Hi, Lori Montry here. Every day I work with people who tell me, I know what to do, I'm just not doing it. And usually they'll add, and that is so frustrating. And I 100% get it. I said the same thing for decades. I knew I wanted to stop eating in response to difficult emotions. I knew I wanted to stop eating foods that didn't serve me. I knew I wanted to make different choices and work with my body instead of battling against it every day. I was able to harness my willpower and discipline for a few days at a time, but then life would get hard and I'd be right back to doing the same things I told myself I would never do again. Now, even though the challenge of emotional eating is incredibly frustrating, it's actually very easily understood. So in this video, I'm going to explore with you some of the reasons why you know exactly what you want to be doing, but find it challenging to do that so much of the time. The first reason we'll talk about is restriction. Now, if you don't eat enough, or if you're making a plan to restrict yourself at a future date, I'm going to start a diet on Monday, your brain sends powerful cravings to convince you that you're in jeopardy. Even thoughts such as, I really shouldn't have sweets, or stay away from the chips, are enough to make your brain nervous. Your brain doesn't understand why food would be disallowed unless there's something wrong, a famine. So it convinces you that should the opportunity for eating these foods arise, you should take advantage of that. Now, this often comes up also when you feel like you've eaten too much, and then you try to undo that experience by being overly strict with yourself. That's why it's so important to treat every eating experience independently. For example, if you overate at lunch, don't try to make up for it at dinner. If while you're eating lunch, you're telling yourself how bad you're being and how you're going to need to make up for it later, guess what your brain is going to say in order to protect you? It's going to say, oh man, she's going to starve me later. I better make sure that I have plenty to withstand the famine. Thinking about the restriction that you're going to impose later will cause your brain to send out powerful distress signals and cause you to eat even more despite your efforts to control. Being mindful and non-judgmental during your eating experiences can really help you recognize when restriction, either real or anticipated, is driving your behavior. Similarly, the act of eating a bad food or a food that you consider to be bad is often a trigger that will keep you going with that food long after it's stopped tasting good or providing any real enjoyment. Perhaps you have one donut and then before you know it, you've eaten 4 because the stress of ruining your diet by eating a single donut caused you to turn to more food to deal with that stress. A related scenario is when you begin to eat one donut and then end up eating 6 because you never eat just one. Whenever you eat donuts, you always go way overboard because the whole time you're eating them, you're swearing to yourself that you're never going to allow another donut to cross your lips again. Another mindset that is similar to this scenario is when you want to get rid of the bad food from your house so that you don't have to try to avoid it anymore. If a food makes you feel guilty and out of control, it makes perfect sense that you would want to get it out of your sight, even if that means that removing it means eating it, right? So staying mindful and present with yourself is the key to shifting out of these experiences. Try to slow down and really recognize what is happening. And then begin a conversation with yourself. And that conversation, it might look something like, in the past, there was a lot of shame, guilt, and lack of control with food. But as I shift out of that, I know that all foods are allowed and have a place in my life if I truly want them. I don't have to eat as much as I can possibly take in right now because this food is always available to me. Now let's talk about boredom. Sometimes food can become an activity, right? Something to fill an uncomfortable space. But being bored means we can't be still. And this is a very common feeling in our society because we are constantly being bombarded with things that we feel we should do, right? Furthermore, we have the opportunity to be doing something every minute, even if it's just checking our phone and our social media. So when we're in that state of doing and busyness so much of the time, it can be really hard to know what to do with ourselves should a spare, quiet moment present itself to us. When we aren't engaged, sometimes this can feel uncomfortable. In addition, boredom often comes when we're feeling dissatisfied or disconnected with self or others. In reality, boredom wouldn't exist if we were fully connected and comfortable with ourselves. So in those moments when you're feeling bored, recognize that you may be feeling more revved up from the busyness of the world. And instead of eating, try to recognize these moments as a gift, which can help you come back to that calm, peace-filled self. An internal conversation to have at a time like that might be something like, I'm finding myself wanting to eat because I'm bored. It's natural to feel a little bit uneasy in quiet moments. The moments feel unusual for my brain, and unusual often feels uncomfortable. So I realize what's happening, and instead of eating, I'm going to try to breathe, calm my nervous system, which has likely been in high gear a lot lately. These moments can actually be seen as a gift. Now, alternatively, if you're bored because you want to do something, but you don't know what that something is, you might talk to yourself in a different way. You might say, I want something. I want to do or experience something, and I'm having a feeling of boredom. Now, I can't really access what it is that I want to do, or I feel that I don't have the energy to do what I want. So I'm going to sit down, make a list of some of the possibilities. This boredom may be a signal that I'm denying myself the things that I want to be doing. This list will help me get in touch with what some of those things are. I don't have to figure it all out right now. This can just be a starting point for me. Now, sometimes we overeat because there's no satisfaction in our eating experiences. A full stomach is not necessarily a satisfied stomach. If you don't allow yourself to enjoy the food, or if you feel guilty for fueling yourself, the experience is not going to feel satisfying. And the same is true if you're eating food that doesn't taste good and doesn't satisfy your palate. So being mindful with your food, eating in a way that results in weight loss does not mean that you have to eat boring or bland food, right? Our food can and should still provide comfort and enjoyment. The goal isn't not to enjoy eating, it's to eat because of that enjoyment and not because of the inability to deal with our emotions. So thinking, that in order to lose weight, we have to deprive ourselves, or that has to be really hard, or that we can't enjoy our food, that's just a limiting belief. Life should be full of satisfaction, body and soul. So as you're planning your food and making your food, make sure your food is satisfying. Also eat until you're satisfied. How many times have you tried to be good, right? When you're eating your meal and then you end up eating large amounts later because you got hungry and then felt bad that you weren't following your rules. Listen to your body when it comes to food. Allow it to be your guide and it will lead you in the right direction. It wants to be at your healthy, natural weight as much as you want to. The next thing we'll talk about is sometimes food becomes a way of saving us from something. Now, this type of eating can be thought of as avoidance eating. What do I mean? Well, imagine a scenario, this came up this week, where a woman comes to me and she says, I've been eating beyond satiety every night at dinner. So I say, what do you do after dinner? She says, I clean up, I make lunches, I help kids with their homework, whatever other chores need to be done, the laundry. And I say, any idea why it might be preferable to sit at the table and eat more if that's what lies ahead of you for the rest of the night? The act of sitting there a little longer is really an act of self-care. Feels like the only opportunity to do anything that isn't chores and work for the rest of the night. It's easy to see something has to be done to fill that necessary self-care piece that staying at the table is filling. Saving you eating is also very common when you're facing a task that may be difficult or uncomfortable. Now again, awareness is the key to handling this type of situation. The internal conversation in this case might sound something like, oh, I see that I'm wanting to eat right now because I want to avoid doing this task, or because there's no enjoyment in the rest of my day. This is natural, and it makes sense that I would want that food. But will it help me? Yes, I'll have a few moments away from the discomfort that I'm feeling right now, but the task isn't going to go away. How can I make this task easier for me? Can I break it up? Can I get a little help with it? Connecting to that higher self is going to be helpful, and then you can decide the best path to follow. Next is stress and worry. When you're trying to take control of stress eating, do not overlook the fact that in those moments you are stressed, right? Trying to use your willpower and strength when you're already stressed is not going to work. You have no willpower at that time. This is why the first step is take a couple deep breaths, calm your nervous system. Working with your nervous system is a foundational piece of the work that I do with people in my Freedom from Emotional Eating program. Harnessing the power of your nervous system to overcome emotional eating has been the missing piece for thousands of people. Next up is exhaustion. The lack of sleep is a very real trigger for overeating. When our bodies are needing sleep, they are biologically programmed to ask for more food. The appetite regulating hormones of leptin and ghrelin are affected when you haven't had enough sleep. And in addition, in that state of fatigue, you're much more likely to eat and to grab things that convert quickly into energy, think sugar and carbs, in order to perk up. Now, the obvious solution here is to protect your sleep time, knowing that the lack of sleep presents challenges for your body and your ability to regulate your food intake. But in the real world, right, there's going to be plenty of times when, despite your best efforts, you don't get the sleep you need. And in those situations, just recognize that you may get messages from your brain throughout the day that you need extra food. When you think your desire to eat could be related to being tired, remind yourself this is a biological condition and that the awareness of that alone should help you make a choice that serves you a little better. You could try to drink some extra water, get a nap, right, which would be so helpful to this situation. Now, sometimes we don't understand, right, why. We can't identify the issue that's driving us to food, right? And that may be because that issue might be too painful. We just prefer to leave the real issue under the box of donuts, so to speak. Instead of digging into the issue, we give ourselves something to really be upset about. Oh, I just ate 12 donuts, right? So we won't even recognize or have to deal with the real underlying issue. Our psyche is protecting us from something that it believes is too painful for us to handle. These tend to be the issues that we may not see any solution for, or that we feel are really truly beyond our control. Now, when we don't know why we're eating, just take extra care to be compassionate with yourself. The internal conversation could be about helping you to calm yourself and helping you feel safe. You may be surprised what thoughts and emotions are accessible to you when you feel safe. Be patient and don't leave yourself. If you can get yourself to journal in those moments, you will uncover something almost without fail. The internal conversation could look something like this. I want to eat. I don't know why. It feels like it's more than just habit driving me, so it could be that there's an emotion that I'm trying to stay unaware of or an issue. I accept that this is happening for me right now. I'm choosing to bring in my higher self to help me in this space, to remind me that I'm safe. Now, in my Freedom from Emotional Eating program, I teach people there are 3 main keys to overcoming emotional eating, regardless of the situation, regardless of the reason. These keys are learning to override your habituated pathways that cause you to automatically go to food in certain situations. Number 2, learning to work with your nervous system to calm stress and overwhelm. And number 3, learning to feel and process your emotions rather than using food to stuff them down or avoid them. Once you have these 3 skills under your belt, you are no longer driven to eat, and emotional eating becomes a thing of the past. At that point, you no longer think about food unless you're genuinely hungry. You stop eating when you feel just right. At that point, food becomes a nourishing, enjoyable aspect of life instead of something you have to fight against. So next month, I'm going to be sending you information about my 3 keys to overcoming emotional eating masterclass. In that masterclass, I'm going to go through these keys, the ones that are going to bring you food and body freedom. So I really look forward to sharing that information with you. It is the real solution to end emotional eating once and for all. Thank you for spending time with me today, and I look forward to seeing you next week.